What is the freeze response? So I talked about the fawn response as one of the trauma responses, but there's four. There's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And let's talk about the freeze. The freeze response is the worst, I guess you could say, threat to our nervous system. So what happens when we go into freeze is we are completely immobilized. This response is to the utmost fear or a threat to your safety or your environment. So what happens is the body goes into what they call dorsal vagal state. And that is where your heart rate, your breathing, and everything could slow right down. Your body just starts to shut down. And this is where we disassociate. When there's immobilization, we literally disassociate. Everything can go blank. It's the ultimate response of I'm going to go completely dormant and hopes that this perceived threat goes away and saves my life. So what do children do when they're being abused? Because they have no way of escaping. They can't necessarily flight and flee. Fighting often leads to more perceived threat or more threat. And the fawn response is more of a coping mechanism after to avoid the situation that they're in. They freeze. And this is where disassociation comes into play. So what are some of the physical symptoms of freeze? Tight, rigid muscles, lots of anxiety, lots of tightness in the chest, clenched jaw. And for myself personally, I used to get this knot in my throat that would physically hurt, and I couldn't speak because it would just get me in more hot water, so to speak. So I would freeze. What does that look like in an adult? Well, anxiety disorders, panic disorders, OCD tendencies or characteristics, and often depression, or what looks like depression but is actually a freeze response, is isolation, zoning out, watching hours of Netflix, scrolling social media, online shopping, reading books, alcoholism, drug addictions. It's all a way to numb yourself out. So you are numbing when you do this. This is the freeze response. Often in adult dysfunctional relationships, if you've had a freeze response as a child, you will often do the same thing. You will numb out and go blank and disassociate when there's conflict. So if this sounds like you, share your stories down below and let's chat. And then stay tuned and I will talk about the flight and fight response.